Let's imagine this. You're reading your Bible. Maybe you're on a yearly reading plan. Maybe you're just reading a chapter out of the Bible every day. You arrive at the beginning of Song of Solomon. Maybe you've been there, and you ask yourself, what is this doing here? Have you ever sat back and asked yourself that question? Why is Song of Solomon in the Bible? What is God trying to communicate to us through the inclusion of this poem in the Bible? Stay tuned, and we'll talk about it. Well, good evening and welcome back to another week of Explain, another week where we engage the culture from a biblical perspective in a manner which glorifies God. My name is Troy. I'm your host. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another week of Explain. We'll be looking at something that I think is pretty important. I think that if you had to make a list of the books in the Bible that are, number one, misinterpreted, and number two, maybe even as a result of the fact that people get confused by it, overlooked, I think the Song of Solomon would be on that list. And I think you could probably agree with me on that. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about why Song of Solomon is in the Bible and what it's meant to be communicating to us. What is God communicating to us through Song of Solomon? How are we supposed to read Song of Solomon? Okay? And so now that I've set up the question, I want to jump in very quickly to a quick disclaimer. I try as much as I possibly can to make this a family-friendly show, and today will be no exception. But considering the fact that we are going to be dealing with Song of Solomon, I would say, kids, if you're watching this, I would just hit pause really quick. Go grab your parents, have them watch through this video first. Okay, so now that I trust that kids, you have hit pause and grabbed your parents, to just have them make sure that this is okay. And that's really just for the purpose, like I said, we're not going to get into anything that's really out of the ordinary or anything like that today. We're not going to get into anything that I would consider is not family friendly, but considering the fact that we're dealing with the Song of Solomon, I just want to make sure. So with that out of the way, there are two main views of Song of Solomon. And before I get into those, I want to just briefly summarize Song of Solomon. So Song of Solomon goes by, depending on the Bible translation you use. I think if you use the King James Version or the New International Version, it goes by Song of Solomon. I think the prevalence of those two translations throughout the years, especially in American culture, over the last several years, have made that a very popular, easily recognizable title. That seems to be the one that I hear people using most of the time, and I think that's probably because of the prevalence of those two translations. However, there are other translations as well that will use Song of Songs as the title of this book instead. Either way, it's not a deal breaker. It's okay. Anyway, this is a love poem. It is a love poem, and there are a few, you could say, people speaking in this poem. There is a woman, a Shulamite woman, and then there is a man, and a man who seems to have a lot of wealth and power in his community. And those are the two main people that are speaking throughout Song of Solomon, and they are just going back and forth as they go throughout their lives, as they go throughout a period of their lives that includes their marriage, their wedding day, talking about their love for each other, professing their love for each other. And so that's really the main, I guess, thrust of Song of Solomon. Now, there are two main views of this book, and this is where I think people oftentimes will either get confused or start to debate each other even. So there is a more literal view of Song of Solomon, It's just meant this view, this more literal view, would basically say that Song of Solomon is simply God's way of celebrating marriage and celebrating the relationship that a man has with his wife, and that's that view. It's a more literal view. It just says, we see this poem in the Bible, the Song of Solomon, and this is just God's inspired word, and in God's inspired word, you have a man professing his love for his wife, and a woman professing her love for her husband. So it's viewed as God's celebration of marriage, and God's putting forth of marriage as a good thing and as a good gift that he has given. And so people who take that view, and really I guess you could say people who take either view, will say that it's great how the Bible puts forth and celebrates as good a specific marriage ethic. And that's very clearly put forward here in Song of Solomon as well. Okay, so that's the first view. That's the literal view. There's also the allegorical view. The allegorical view, and then basically let me just define allegory. An allegory is a story that's meant to interpret or explain, dive deeper into a bigger truth, into a greater truth. And so someone who would hold the traditional allegory view of Song of Solomon would say that that this poem is meant to demonstrate, to explain God's love for his people, specifically Christ's love for his bride, the church. And so people will have that view as well. And so then they'll begin to read Song of Solomon in such a way as if it's, Christ speaking to his bride. Now, people have taken that view and run really far with it. I would say even to, in unbiblical directions. And so it's important, if you hold that view, to hold it in moderation, to hold it responsibly, respectfully, reverently. I would say someone who held that view well, respectfully, reverently, responsibly, would be Charles Spurgeon. And there are many, many, many. The more I looked into, who has historically held what position, it is interesting how many people who the church today would look up to as giants, who held this view, who hold this view, the allegorical view of Song of Solomon, where it's Christ professing his love for the church. Okay. Those are the two views. And like I said, someone you might know who holds that view, Charles Spurgeon. That's one of the main ones I can put forward to you. I was just listening to a sermon that he preached on Song of Solomon from chapter 2, where he very unapologetically said, this is like Christ's words to his bride, the church. And so there you go. Those are the two positions. And now the question really is, let's walk through it. Let's figure out, let's step through these two positions and figure out how we should look at it. And again, let me just say this. I'm not going to uncover some ancient truth that R.C. Sproul didn't see or that Charles Spurgeon didn't see. And so don't look at what I'm saying as the end-all, be-all. I'm just going to tell you how I view it, how I look at it. And I think I just want to put forward, I think this is a safe and responsible way to look at the book of Song of Solomon. And so my view of this is that it is a both and in a sense, okay? And I'll just kind of, let me lay that out for you. Someone who you might know that holds this view would be Miles Van Pelt. Miles Van Pelt is a Hebrew scholar If you go into seminary, the textbook that they may give you was co-authored for Hebrew. The textbook that they may give you for Hebrew was co-authored by Miles Van Pelt. And so, yeah, he holds this view that it's kind of a both and I am sympathetic to that view. And here's why, okay? I would say that Song of Solomon is primarily a celebration of marriage. It's God's celebration of marriage. And so with that point, I would come down really strongly in R.C. Sproul's court, in Ligonier's court, that it should be interpreted as literally as possible. Of course, we want to make sure that we're responsibly reading the Bible, responsibly interpreting the Bible, but Song of Solomon, I would say, is a celebration of the relationship that a man and his wife has. It's a celebration of marriage. It's God putting forth marriage as something that is good. And so there's that. That's what I think. But we have to be careful because I don't think it ends there. It doesn't end with, let's just put this forward as a celebration of, as God's celebration of marriage. It goes deeper than that. And in order to make that point, I want to point you to a passage you might be a little more familiar with than Song of Solomon, and that's Ephesians chapter 5. So let me turn there now, and let's look at Ephesians chapter 5, which talks about Christ's love for his church, and it makes this comparison that the church is Christ's bride, just like the woman is the man's bride. Okay, so let's look at Ephesians chapter 5. Verse 25, we'll begin there. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are all members of his body. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Okay, so I know we covered a lot of ground there, but the main point that I want you to see simply is that God is clearly saying in Ephesians chapter 5 that marriage, especially a healthy marriage, is an image, even though it's not a perfect image, it's an image of Christ's relationship with his church. And so I would just ask you this question, all right? Of course, we want to make sure that that when we look at Song of Solomon, that we're interpreting it as, I would say, God's celebration of marriage. But this is what I would say. When we look at Song of Solomon, is that a marriage? That would be the question that I have to ask. Is it a marriage? And is God putting forth this marriage as a celebration of marriage in general? And I think the answer from everybody in the stands, in the bleachers, would be yes, it is. It is this marriage that God is putting forward in Song of Solomon is meant to celebrate marriage in general, on the whole. Okay. With that being said, if God is putting forth a marriage in order to celebrate marriage as a whole, could it not be said that this marriage is supposed to point us, even the marriage in Song of Solomon, just like any marriage, is supposed to point us to the greater reality, and that is Christ's relationship with his church? Okay, do you see what I'm saying here? So I think that you can say that Song of Solomon is meant to celebrate marriage in a very literal sense. It's God's celebration of marriage, you could say. I think that we can say that, and at the same time, we can say that this marriage that's being celebrated in Song of Solomon is meant to point us to a greater reality, just like any marriage, as we learned in Ephesians 5, is meant to point us to the greater reality of Christ's love for his church, okay? And what I think that does is that guards us really on both sides. So that guards us from looking at Song of Solomon in such a way where we just pass over it. I think there is a greater truth. There's a greater reality even beyond the fact that God is celebrating marriage. Okay, so it helps us from, Song of Solomon just being the book that we skip over all the time on the one hand. But then I think this also guards us on the other end of things from over-applying the book of Song of Solomon to our, to our relationship with Christ. I mean, there are some things in the book, in Song of Solomon, that we shouldn't take and say, this is a picture of Christ's love for me. I think that that's a very fair thing to say. There are certain things that we shouldn't do that with. And I think there are people who have run way too far with that perspective. And so we don't want to do that either. And so I think to be careful and to be, safe and reverent in our understanding of this book of the Bible is the best. Okay. So to recap, I know I've just thrown a lot at you before we move on here. First of all, I believe that Song of Solomon is meant to be interpreted primarily as God's celebration of marriage. Okay? Hear that loud and clear. Like I said, for all the people in the back, hear that loud and clear, okay? But secondly, marriage in general and the marriage in Song of Solomon is meant to point us to the greater reality of Christ's love for his church. Number 3, we should interpret these things responsibly and carefully, okay? We don't want to grow cold to the book of Song of Solomon because it's God's word. And at the same time, we don't want to take the allegory and run to places that I don't think God intended us to run to with it, okay? So there's that. Like I said, just be careful not to press the allegory too far. Now, with that framework in mind, I want to look at Song of Solomon. And you can do what's called, you can make an argument from the lesser to the greater. Okay? Now, there are many people who have probably done a better job at explaining this than I have, but it kind of goes like this. The lesser reality is a marriage that you would see between two human beings, right? You could say, for example, any marriage that you know of, or even if you want to use an example like what we were just talking about, you could look at the marriage in Song of Solomon. And that is what you would call a lesser reality. It's still a reality. It's still a good reality. It's still a reality that God is putting forward and celebrating. But it's a lesser reality in comparison to the greater reality. The greater reality in this case is Christ's love for his church, okay? And so, follow me on this. If the man is supposed to love his wife as Christ loves the church, and that's the lesser reality. The lesser reality is the man loving his wife like Christ loves the church. And why is it a lesser reality? Well, there's many reasons, because he's not there, and some of them we can't comprehend. But one reason I could just put forward to you is because he's not perfect. Okay, he's going to mess up. He's going to try, especially if he's a Christian, of course, but he's going to mess up. That's the lesser reality. The lesser reality is the man's love for his wife. And what you could say is, for example, in Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 2, and this is supposed to be the man who is saying this, right? He says, "As a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women." And so we could say that this man's love for his wife and his kindness towards his wife, or towards this woman that he's going to marry, you could say, towards his bride, his love for her is great. And we could say this: if the reality is this man's love for this woman is great, and this is meant to be a picture of marriage, how much more? Now it's the greater reality, so that's the lesser reality. The greater reality is, we could say, how much more is Christ's love for his people, for the church, his bride. Do you see where we're going with this? Okay, that's one example. Okay, here's another example. Chapter 4, verse 7. The man says, "You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you." Okay, and again, we can make the argument from the lesser reality, the marriage of a man and a woman, the love that a man has for his bride, to the greater reality. We can make that argument from the lesser to the greater. The greater reality is Christ's love for his bride, for his people. And so, if this is true, that this man loves his wife and says, "You are altogether beautiful," and there is no flaw in you, how much more will Christ say a very similar thing on the day when the bride is presented, the church, the bride of Christ, is presented to him without spot, without blemish, just like Ephesians chapter 5 says. Could it be said, could the same thing be said of the bride of Christ, the church, who he washed, who he sanctified, so that she would be without spot, without blemish on the last day? Could that be said? Could that argument be made from the lesser to the greater? See, I'm trying to get you to think. I'm trying to get you to carefully apply this, okay? Or how about this? I heard someone preach a sermon on this or use this as an example in his sermon. Verse 9 of Song of Solomon, chapter 4. "You have captivated my heart, my sister, my bride. You have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes." Again, you think about this. Man, could it be that God's love for us, that Christ's love for his bride, could this just be giving us a little window into Christ's love for his bride? Again, you want to be careful. You don't want to interpret this like one-to-one, like it's just like this. But could this be giving us a window into the greater reality of Christ's love for his bride? Okay? And so that's the name of the game here, is you need to, number one, carefully, and this is like the main rule, I think, of Song of Solomon, is to very carefully interpret it, to very carefully make applications, especially when you're seeing that this marriage is pointing you to a greater reality. Like I said, any marriage, and this point is not disputable, okay? A lot of what I've said, people can debate, people can go back and forth about it, but this is not disputable, is that any marriage is meant to point to Christ's relationship with his church, okay? And so my question would simply be, why is this marriage any exception, okay? So yes, God can be putting forth and celebrating marriage here, and I think that's what he's doing. I think that is what he's doing. However, we can make the application that as God puts forth and celebrates marriage, we can remember that there is a greater marriage that all marriages are meant to point to, including the one here that God is celebrating, is meant to point to that greater marriage of Christ and the church, his bride. Okay, one more verse in Song of Solomon I want to point you to. Chapter 6, verse 4. "You are beautiful as Tirzah, my love, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners." Again, when we think about the love that this man has for his wife, there is a greater reality that we can think about, and that is Christ's love for his people. And when you start to look at it that way, it's like, man, could it really be that Christ loves his bride like that? And the answer is yes, because greater than, and this is another point that's indisputable, greater than any love that you could ever imagine on this earth, any love that you could ever imagine, is Christ's love for all of his people. If you're one of Christ's people, his love for you is greater than anything you could ever imagine. And sometimes we blow right past that, but we shouldn't. We should stop on that. Because greater than any love that you could ever imagine is Christ's love for you. And if nothing else, whether you read Song of Solomon literally, allegorically, I want you to know that Christ's love for you is greater than this groom's love for his bride, and it's greater than anything you could ever imagine. All right. So I hope that was helpful. I hope maybe that clears away a little bit of the mystery surrounding Song of Solomon, and I hope you guys have a great week. God bless.